So, NR, and maybe we'll start with something simple and then we'll build it up. So, why did you choose to become an entrepreneur? And beyond the reason that you have often stated publicly, you saw a market for software and so on and so forth. But what was your personal desire? What was your emotional need to become an entrepreneur? And I ask this from the perspective that many entrepreneurs in the audience, and so on.
Well, before I try and answer that question, let me say there are two things that have happened today which are somewhat unusual for me. One is the excellent set of answers given by Ashish. So much of wisdom in his answers. I enjoyed every minute. Therefore, following him is not easy. Number two, I have never had a conversation in public with somebody who is half my age. So, therefore, that again, given that I will soon be entering my 78th year, it makes me somewhat less confident than what I would like to be. Well, the question that you asked is a very important one. I was a strong leftist when I was a student. And then I went to France to work there. And on Saturdays, I went to Sorbonne and had lots of conversations with the capitalists, socialists, and communists. And I finally came to the conclusion that the only way a society can indeed remove its poverty is through the power of entrepreneurship, the power of creating jobs, the power of translating ideas into jobs, power of translating ideas into wealth for some people, investors, and power of enhancing taxes paid to the government. And that was primarily the reason why when I came back, I wanted to conduct an experiment, my first experiment. You were not even born then. So that was a failure, Softronics. And I learned some lessons from that. And the second one has done reasonably well.
So, there is often, at least when you read the media, you feel there's an allure around entrepreneurs because if you're a very successful entrepreneur, you make money and so on. It's one side of life.
Hold it to you, near you.
Sorry, that's one side of life, the success that entrepreneurs see and so on.
I would say it to anybody, not just because, okay, please, yeah.
So, but can almost anybody become an entrepreneur, or are there certain traits that you feel one must inherently have, or an approach one must have to at least attempt to be an entrepreneur?
Well, I think an entrepreneur must have many attributes, and I'll speak only about a few. First, he, as late Robert Kennedy, borrowing the words of George Bernard Shaw, said, most people see things as they are and wonder why. I dream of things that never are and then say, why not? In other words, he or she must have the power of imagination. He or she must be comfortable with innovation. He or she must be comfortable with doing something unusual. Second, he or she must have a lot of passion, because passion is what fuels your energy, your enthusiasm, and your ability to run the marathon. Third, the leader must have a very clearly articulatable value system. That's very, very important, because everybody looks up to the leader, everybody looks up to the founder. So therefore, his or her value system must be very clearly articulatable, and he or she must obviously lead by example. And finally, I think because the task of a founder is to convince customers, is to convince employees, to convince investors, he or she must have the ability to articulate reasonably well. Otherwise, it just won't happen.
So then does the role of a founder change over time in an organization? Because what you just articulated is at the very beginning, but does that stay consistent? Does that change? Does that evolve? How does a founder's role in a company or in building an organization, how does that evolve?
Well, in the beginning, it is all about imagining an idea whose differentiated business value to the customer is better than all other existing ideas. That's most important. Second, as I pointed out earlier, he or she must be able to articulate the power of his idea or her idea to various stakeholders to attract good employees, to attract customers. It's very, very difficult in the beginning because you almost have nothing to talk about. Third, he or she must, once again, I come back to them, he or she must have high aspirations. He or she must have a lot of optimism, lot of hope, because all around you are saying, nahi yaar, ye to nahi chalega. But it is the founder that has to sustain energy from inside and run the marathon. That is the initial part. The next part is selecting employees, some key employees, sometimes called co-founders, and what I call early adopters. And for that, as I pointed out earlier, your job is all about passionately articulating why you are going to change the world. Second, you have to use innovative methods to convince your customer that you, who has really nothing, is indeed better than backing somebody who has everything. You know, in 1983, when we went to MICO, we were competing with very powerful and rich people for the data center operation thing. I realized that the only plus I had was my ability to use mathematical modeling to demonstrate that our computer for data center was much better than the other fellows. So I used a book, which obviously you know, called Jean-Luc Bayer. He used to be a professor at University of Washington, Seattle. He had written a book on quantitative methods in computer architecture. I used that book and I made a presentation. My presentation was to be for 20 minutes. It went on for 8 hours. And I asked them, have my competitors given you this data? No. So I think the second phase, your responsibility is to use some smartness, to use your passion with customers, investors, and employees. And this is the time when you have to sacrifice very heavily. Because at that time, money is very little. Challenges are huge. And you have to sacrifice hugely in terms of being away from family, being away from loved ones, traveling, with minimal expenses, staying in hotels with minimum expenses, and economizing on every expense in the company. Of course, these days it's different, but I'm talking of the olden days. So that is another very important aspect in the building up stage. And the other aspect of entrepreneurial phase of any company is quick decision making. Everything you will have to take quick decisions. You can't say, I'll form a committee and the committee will come back, will give a report and then I will decide. No, you have to decide quickly. Next, every startup company must have only one leader. There cannot be two leaders. There cannot be three leaders. It's just one leader. I was very, very fortunate to have had such compliance by all my younger colleagues. Because one thing is, that leader earns the plaudits, earns the loyalty of all the younger people, because he or she sacrifices more than other people. He or she works harder than other people. He or she takes much less salary or makes huge sacrifices in salary than other people, etc., etc. This is the entrepreneurial phase. The final stage comes, and that is called managerial phase. Once the managerial phase comes in, that is when you invite managers to create systems and processes, to create protocols, to invite independent directors, to have a good governance mechanism. And, of course, by somewhere around this time you would have got listed, then you have to provide quarterly results, and all of that. So this is how a founder metamorphosizes himself or herself over these phases.